In prison, half the lifers I knew were married or in a serious relationship. And most of these guys are new law, which means they're not parole eligible. So they're doing natural life. Like they do not have a release date, they do not have a parole date. And it's amazing to me, or at least it was when I first got locked up, that women would want me to be in a relationship like that. Because most of the guys who came in and were already married, those marriages fell apart. But the relationships were built while they were inside seemed to thrive. It makes you wonder, like, why would a woman want to be with a man who's in prison, especially one who's never getting out? It's one thing to like build a relationship while they're there and then have something to look forward to, but so I came across a couple things. There were some women who had been abused or were incredibly mistrustful of men, so they got to have this relationship, the kind of like bad boy element, but they also got to control it. Like they only went to see him when they wanted, they only accepted the phone calls if they wanted, they had the control in the relationship, and I think that gave a great sense of like safety. It was a way to kind of rehabilitate, control or power in a relationship. On the other hand, I saw some women who were really unstable and unhappy and could not be in a relationship on the outside. Like it just would not work. So this was the only way. They could kind of hold guys hostage, or they could kind of, control the situation, but in a negative and a manipulative way. And I always thought that was the most heartbreaking, because you had two hurt people, or sometimes the guy in prison was really just trying to be a good person, and there was a lot of like kind of pain conflicted back and forth. And the other one, and this really, really made me angry, was you had guys in prison who would be controlling of kind of abused or broken women on the outside. The same thing where they didn't feel like they were worth anything more, they didn't value anything more. And then these guys would kind of tell them what to do and kind of like provide the structure to their life they thought they needed. And it really frustrated me because it was often abusive, it was often really unhealthy. Anytime I was in there and I would see this guy listen or yelling on the phone about, whatever he was doing, yelling or cursing at his girlfriend or his wife, it made me really angry, because I don't think anybody should be spoken to like that. But those relationships are strangely like stabilizing and normal as a whole. Like there were guys in a pod where phone calls would be set up for a certain time, because it's, yeah, my wife gets off work then, I need to be on the phone here, my wife gets home here. It's insane. And a bigger part of it was that so many of these marriages were international. So these are women in Europe, in Australia, in New Zealand, in Canada, all over the world. And it seems bizarre, but I remember like, Tim's wife is in Australia, and they had to put this whole thing together and have her fly over here. It was probably several $1,000s just so they could meet in person the first time. I believe the next time she flew over, they got married. And the logistics of getting like a marriage approved and organized from people from different countries is just a nightmare. But I guess the prisons are used to it at this point, because there's this whole thing about, I think it's in England and Germany, where women aren't allowed to write the men in prison there's no public database of the people who are locked up. So they reach out to American prisoners. And there's this big thing. I mean, I remember when I would post a write a prisoner ad, I would get letters from England, from all over Europe, from Northern Africa, from Australia, New Zealand, like everywhere. And it was really strange to me, but there's this fascination with the American prisoner, with our American prison system. So I had a few relationships while I was inside, before I met Courtney. I had one that just kind of started out of the blue because a friend of a friend, and we met and just, had this kind of great connection. I had one where I put a write a prisoner up, and I met somebody who was living in Northern Africa and had this bizarre like connection from halfway across the planet. And then she ended up moving to DC, so right by where I was, and it was just kind of shocking and weird. And I've even had a relationship where I've never physically met the person, and we had like a long extended relationship. So I guess before Courtney and I got together, I had some experience, good and bad, and some kind of learning things. And what I realized mostly was what I didn't want. And I don't think I was yet clear on what I did. But what I recognized was that in this situation where a relationship can't be physical, where we can't just do things together, like some people are like, oh, we just watch TV, or we just drink, or we had to communicate about everything, because there was no common activity. And then Courtney was the one who was smart enough to realize, like, we have to build a common activity. So that was why I did the first season of the podcast. So it was a thing we talked about and we planned, and we ended up recording and releasing. And to be fair, she did all the recording and releasing. Like, I was in prison, I just talked on the phone. But so we found a way to communicate about our past. She used to call it a data dump, which I really liked, where we would just talk about everything and all our stories and all our perspectives and all our fears, and we would just kind of data dump onto each other, so we had like the full picture of each other. Then we would communicate about daily things and daily struggles, but we also had that common project. And we would also, we would follow the news together, we would read books together. We found ways to find common ground and share. And I found that with a lot. I have a buddy in prison who just got married to a woman who is significantly younger than him. And it's one of those situations where if you look from the outside, it just looks completely insane. But you have a very intelligent, very emotionally mature guy who cares about her and shows up for her in ways that guys her own age are not. So it's kind of a shame in many ways. Like she's a very smart, very capable girl, but most of the guys her age are only interested in one night stand, or only interested in, the physical. And so when she's looking for an emotional relationship, when that's what she's looking for, the dating pool out there is literally so bad that she ends up finding a guy in prison. And she was one of those people who was like Courtney, where she was not intentionally dating a prisoner. She didn't go on a website to find a prisoner. She didn't like make this a pattern. She didn't look for this. She was somebody who just kind of fell into it. So Courtney had interviewed me for a story, and we stayed in touch, and a friendship developed when she left TV. And then that friendship just deepened. But she had never dated a prisoner before. She never would have. Like, she didn't think she would. Like, when she told me she was in love with me, she was like, I feel like I'm crazy. Like, this doesn't even make any sense. And that's the same thing with this girl that I'm talking about. She's never been, interested in a guy in prison. And so you find these exceptions, these relationships that aren't because of somebody's kind of like limitations or somebody's kind of past trauma, but relationships where two people just find each other and they just click. And it's hard because you have the limited interaction. You have to work that much harder to communicate or to share things because you can't have that shared physical experience. But my relationship with Courtney while I was inside was the most satisfying and meaningful, and I couldn't have imagined it being that good. And that was where, like I said, I had figured out what I didn't want, but I hadn't yet figured out what I did, because when Courtney came along and we started looking at it romantically, I was like, this isn't anything like what I thought or what I planned. But what I realized was all those past plans or ideas or the kind of model that I was holding on to was ultimately the relationship that wasn't fulfilling. And I had to be open to something new and something different. And I'm really grateful that I was, because had I not been, we wouldn't be, together today, and I'd probably be in one of those kind of empty, like vapid relationships, or like going through the buffet mentality of life. And I know that that wouldn't make me happy. I did that a lot in my youth. I did that with my addiction. I did that with other things. So realizing that, the next thing is not going to make us happy, but instead we have to be happy where we are. And when we find somebody that we can connect with, it's an absolutely amazing opportunity. So surprisingly, a lot of those people in prison relationships, a lot of those women from overseas are really happy. And I think it's encouraging that if we focus on communication and we focus on appreciation and we focus on connecting with the people that we're around or the relationship that we're with, there's a lot of potential there, because if they can make it work in prison, we can definitely make it work out here in the world.